It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. It's time for The Verdict.
Hello there, and welcome to this special edition of The Verdict. Glad you're with us. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're typically here Wednesday nights at 9:30, but tonight, on this night before the elections, we're here to talk about the United States Senate race.
I know all of us have heard an awful lot about the United States Senate race, and perhaps some of us are getting a little tired of it, but this should be the last thing you'll hear about it, and you'll hear from both candidates. You'll hear from Brad Carson, who will be on the set with us, and you'll hear by film clip from Tom Coburn, who has authorized the use of these film clips and knows what they're going to be and approves of them. So you will get the issues discussed tonight, probably for the last time before you go to the voting booth tomorrow to vote. And we, of course, without regard to how you vote, Mick and I certainly encourage you to make that trip. Also, as an added bonus, the last few minutes of this show, we're going to talk about each state question that you're going to see on the ballot. So it may, if it helps you to take some notes, we're not going to mention how you ought to vote or how you ought not to vote on those state questions, just what they are and what they mean.
United States Congressman Brad Carson, former Congressman Dr. Tom Coburn, coming up on The Verdict. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett, Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce our guest and tell them more about his show.
We are really pleased today to have in studio with us the Honorable Brad Carson, the congressman from the 2nd District, who is the Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. And tomorrow you will have a chance to go to the polls and vote for either Brad Carson or Tom Coburn. Let me tell you just a little bit first about Brad Carson. Brad is, of course, a native Oklahoman. He is a Baylor graduate, and he attained the distinction of being named a Phi Beta Kappa upon his graduation from Baylor. He was then named a Rhodes Scholar. He's an OU Law graduate with highest honors at the OU Law School and has twice been elected to Congress from the 2nd District. Brad, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to join us. We really do appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Ken. It's nice to be here on the eve of the important election.
Well, we know it's a busy time, and we're grateful for your time. Former Congressman Tom Coburn could not join us. He is otherwise occupied. He, however, sends his regards and his regrets for not being here, and he has graciously allowed us to use some clips from former verdict shows to kind of frame some of these issues. So let's look at a slide that tells us a little bit about Tom Coburn. He's a native Oklahoman. He is an OSU undergraduate with a degree in business, an OU medical school graduate where he was class president. He now practices medicine in Muskogee, Oklahoma, where he specializes in family medicine, obstetrics, and allergy-related illnesses. He's a former 2nd District Congressman for 3 terms from the same district that Brad Carson now represents. And we're pleased that we can have Tom Coburn at least by tape here, and we're sorry that we can't have him live. Mick, why don't you take off here?
Well, 2 important resumes, 2 very impressive resumes from both these candidates. We asked Tom Coburn on a previous show to describe himself. Just who is Tom Coburn? Here's what he had to say. You know, Tom, we continually hear that people like to vote for the person. So basically, who is Tom Coburn? What's your personal life back in a brief history?
Born in Wyoming, but raised in Oklahoma. Had a great set of parents. Worked in business for 8 years in a family business. Got interested in medicine. Made a change in my life. Went to med school. Raised 3 daughters, 3 grown daughters, 4 grandchildren. One lives in New York, and one in Memphis, and one in Muskogee. The grandchildren are all in Muskogee, much to my happiness. Served in Congress basically because I thought people other than career politicians ought to be there. And did that pledging term limits, adamantly believe in term limits as a way to solve a lot of our problems, and left after my 3 terms were there. went back, and I've been practicing medicine ever since. And I have a wonderful wife. I've been married 35 years. She is the person who allows me to be what I'm supposed to be, and nurtures me, and also chides me in a way that keeps me on the mark. And it's the best thing that ever happened in my life.
That's Dr. Tom Coburn answering the question, who is Tom Coburn? Now we'll pose the same question to Congressman Brad Carson.
Well, you know, my family comes from the small town of Stillwell, Oklahoma, right on the Arkansas line, about 2,000 people. My family's been there for a couple of hundred years. My mother's family actually came on the Trail of Tears. She was brought up on the Indian allotment that was given to her family by the government. My father's family is active in banking and business there. My father actually was a career employee of the Department of the Interior, much of that time working as an agricultural extension agent. I moved around with him much as a youth as he was involved in agriculture and farming before coming back and finishing high school up in Jenks and in Tulsa. I met my wife, Julie, at the University of Oklahoma. I went off to Baylor University, practiced law with Kent once upon a time. He was somebody who was a mentor to me, taught me much, not only about the great practice of law, but how to uphold the standards of integrity that are expected of the profession, but are often lacking, but always found in Kent, and I'm always grateful for that. Got elected to Congress in 2000 when Tom Coburn stepped down. And I've really run for office because, you know, I think the state needs people like David Boren, Henry Bellman, people like Robert S. Kerr, who really made it their mission to use these important positions to benefit the people back home. We have a lot of great challenges in the state, and it's important that we have people in Washington, D.C. who are committed to finding the kind of bipartisan, independent solutions that will meet those challenges for future generations.
Dr. Coburn mentioned in his earlier clip remarks about term limits. And as you know, he served 3 terms and then stepped down. What is your view of term limits and how you would deal with it if you should be elected as a United States Senator?
I don't have any problem with term limits, but they have to be applicable to every state in the country. If we are the only state to have term limits on our federal representatives, we will continually fall behind states, both large and small, that send people to Washington and gain seniority. You know, Tom said he wants to serve 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. I want to go up there and gain the kind of seniority it takes to really wield clout and use the Senate seat to help the people. So I think it is much wiser if we send someone to Washington who says we can have term limits, but we should never unilaterally disarm.
Well, let's take a look at a clip to see what Tom Coburn had to say about term limits on his previous appearance on The Verdict. I know you self-imposed a 3-term limit when you were in the House of Representatives. Do you have a plan to do the same thing should you be elected to the Senate?
I do, 2 terms, and let me give you the motivation behind that. If your motivation is to represent your constituency and what's in the best long-term interest of this country, your motivation can't be conflicted with your career. And that's the rub that we have in Washington today. There's lots of good people in Washington, but they're more interested in staying in Washington than they are in terms of fixing the long-term problems of this country. And by term limiting yourself, you have set the mark that says, I'm going to be about the business of this country, not the business of my political career. And it gives you tremendous freedom to do what you think is right. And you're not beholden to a political party. You're not beholden to a philosophy. You're beholden to what is in the best long-term interests of this country. And quite frankly, that gets sacrificed very often today in what happens in Washington.
That's Dr. Tom Coburn discussing term limits. We'll be back with more of this special edition of The Verdict concerning the U.S. Senate race when we return. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers in studio along with Congressman Brad Carson. Dr. Tom Coburn is joining us virtue of videotape on previous editions of The Verdict. We asked Dr. Coburn to start this segment about Medicare, and he discusses the privatization of Social Security. Let's go to that clip right now and hear what Dr. Coburn has to say. You've served as a doctor, you've served as a United States Congressman. You must have some strong thoughts on Medicare.
I do. Let me pull all those together. Medicare, today, as we speak, Medicare is insolvent. We're taking discretionary funds to pay for Part A of Medicare. That means money's coming out of the budget that would normally be for defense or health care, health research, education, all the agriculture, all the other things that the government does. We're taking money out of that now to start paying back the money that we stole from Medicare over the last 40 years. With Medicare, with Social Security, we're going to see the same thing start in 2012, 2016. We've known about these problems for 20 years. We've known that this day is coming, and yet we haven't seen the courage to fix the problems. Social Security can be fixed. There's no question it can be fixed. It'll take 70 years to fix it, but we got a portion of it needs to be privatized so that we can use what Albert Einstein called the most powerful force on earth, and that's compound interest. Social Security is very discriminatory against our African American and Latino brothers and sisters.
In what way?
The average life expectancy is below the retirement age. So if you're a black male in our country today and you work 45 years and put $70,000 into Social Security and die before you're 67, you get nothing back. If you put that same money in a passbook savings at 3.5% and compounded it every year, you'd have $600,000 or $700,000. So not only do they not get it back, they don't get the benefits of the interest earned on it because the government's stolen it. So we need to reform that, and we can protect everybody that's near retirement or close to it. We can allow anybody that wants to stay in the system to stay in the system, and yet we can allow the younger people who want to have a private portion of their Social Security put into privatization, real assets when they retire, also assets that they can will to their children. So what we've really done is we've stolen the opportunity for growth of assets and in terms of funding our future by stealing the money now and not allowing it to work for our own retirement. So those two problems can be solved. Medicare is much more difficult because we need to change a lot of the incentives in health care. We need to incentivize quality care, and mainly we need to incentivize prevention because we have a chronic disease population. As we age, those problems are going to be more difficult. But if we incentivize prevention now, then we'll save a lot of dollars on the tail end because we'll avoid a lot of the chronic diseases that we treat today.
That's Dr. Tom Coburn. Now it's Congressman Carson's turn.
Well, you know, seniors are so important to our state. We have a state where we send a lot of our young people move out of state, and we come back with retirees who are coming at the end of their lives. And so seniors are such an important part of our state. And this is a very important difference between Tom Coburn and me in the Senate race. He wants to privatize Social Security and Medicare. I am adamantly and ardently opposed to that. Privatizing the programs will be the first step to ending them. We know what life was like before before Social Security and Medicare for our seniors, for people like my own parents who are now in their 70s. Seniors were the most destitute, most impoverished, said they were the worst off group in all of society. That was the genius of Social Security for Franklin Roosevelt. When people talking about personal accounts and things like that, personal accounts are great. But right now, the way Social Security works, I am paying for my parents' Social Security. My payroll taxes do that. And so if you allow someone who is young, like me at age 37, to divert some of my payroll taxes to private accounts, it means my parents' generation is going to have to suffer either a benefit cut or a tax increase. And that would be devastating to them, devastating to the hundreds of thousands of seniors in this state. I believe that we can reform Social Security in a sensible fashion. We can take these small incremental steps that will deal with the long-term fiscal challenges that Social Security faces, Medicare too. But to end the programs would be a disaster. So I think it is important for seniors to recognize that Tom Coburn wants to privatize the programs. He's called for that about 10 times in the course of this campaign. He's just mentioned it in that last clip. He calls Medicare a Soviet-style program. He thinks that Medicare is not a smart program for seniors. I think Medicare has saved the lives of lots of people, including my own mother, and that it should be expanded to cover the prescription drugs that our seniors need. And we can find ways to afford that if we negotiate drug prices, if we re-import these drugs from Canada. So this is a big fundamental difference between Tom and I. I believe that Social Security and Medicare need to remain in their intact form for seniors, so while Tom chooses to privatize them.
Let me change the subject to foreign trade / free trade. What is your view on the free trade laws and on NAFTA and the like?
We know trade can benefit this country tremendously, and we have a lot of farmers and ranchers who export the goods that they produce on the very fertile Oklahoma lands. But it is very important also that we have fair trade, that we don't have trade agreements in which the United States is at a tremendous disadvantage, where other countries take advantage of us routinely, and I think they often do. You know, we have sent thousands upon thousands of jobs here in Oklahoma to Mexico, to China, to other countries like that. This has to come to a stop. A lot of people who say, well, you can't stop it in any way. I say, you get me in the U.S. Senate and you watch me. We have to stop this flood of good jobs to Mexico and China. And trade agreements are part of the problem. We need to have the right kind of trade agreements that open up new markets for Oklahoma goods, but make sure that we're not being taken advantage of by countries like China, Mexico, and others that that are really taking our jobs away, not obeying labor laws, paying their people cents on the dollar, using prison labor, child labor. This has to come to a stop.
Let's take a look at a clip from what Dr. Tom Coburn said in response to a similar question. Let me change the subject with you now and talk about foreign trade. I know that you have paid a good bit of attention to our current trade policies and think they are in a need of scrapping, tweaking, adjusting, whatever. What do you think about our current trade policies?
Well, I think we need to have free trade. Free trade benefits us. We don't get that talked about much. We get the free trade policies have beat up because we've lost a lot of jobs. But there's a difference between free trade and fair trade. And unfortunately, our free trade policies have been not negotiated well enough to give the American worker not protection, but an opportunity to compete on a level playing field. And we're not seeing that. We also have a very difficult problem. We had a $500 billion trade deficit. If that continues, pretty soon the value of the dollar is going to decline precipitously. And we're going to see an economic shift in the world, and we can't allow that to happen. So we need to have strong negotiators to say, China, you're not going to have a $250 billion trade deficit with us. You know, we're the best market in the world. We need to use that power as the best market to get a better deal on trade policies, and we've just not done that. And you can't, I'd make one other point. You can't expect Oklahomans or Americans to say it's okay to have free trade and then turn around and tell them they can't have free trade on pharmaceuticals, where we pay 43% more than anybody else in the world for prescription drugs, and yet we can't import drugs from Canada, Mexico, or Germany over the internet or any other way because it's not allowed, yet we're exporting our own jobs. You can't have it both ways. We got to have a trade policy that's fair to the American worker and fair to the American consumer, and we don't have that.
Tonight, before the election, we're discussing the U.S. Senate race that you'll be voting upon tomorrow. We'll be right back and discuss the negative campaigning that's taken place in this race. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this special edition of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, Congressman Brad Carson with us here in studio, Dr. Tom Coburn joining us virtue of videotape, and we're going to start this segment with a clip from Dr. Coburn in one of his earlier visits on The Verdict. We asked him about the topic of negative campaigning. Tom Coburn, when we left, I was going to ask you to speak about negative campaigning. How do you define it?
I think negative campaigning is when you try to undermine the character and virtue of your opponent. You know, a comparison of votes is a legitimate comparison. A comparison of your actual representative actions in Congress is legitimate. I don't have any problems with that. But, you know, I don't doubt that Brad Carson's motives are good. I don't doubt that he's a loyal, faithful American. We see things totally opposite in terms of how best the government can interact with the populace.
But if you feel like your opponent is twisting your beliefs, will you attack him in a similar manner, or will you simply defend yourself?
I think I'll defend myself. You know, there's plenty of vote differences, whether it's rating by the National Taxpayers Union on him getting D's and F's and me getting A's and B's in terms of protecting our future in terms of money. There's tremendous difference in our vision on pro-life and social issues, and our votes back that up, and a fair comparison of that is right. You know, the thing is, again, I said earlier, how somebody campaigns is going to be how they govern, and all people have value, and all people have positive character traits, and we ought to be about the positive things and the difference in the vision rather than undermining somebody's character or credibility.
That's Dr. Tom Coburn. Congressman Carson, the topic is negative campaigning.
Well, I think people are quite sick of all the negative campaigning in this particular Senate race, and they're ready for this election tomorrow to be over with. We've given as good as we got in this campaign. You know, it's interesting hearing the clip. The first negative campaign ad in this race was run by Tom Coburn when he was down in the polls, and you know, they started calling me liberal, ultra-liberal, the most liberal person ever in the history of state politics of the United States Senate. You know, a record that I have compiled which totally contradicts that allegation. And so we've defended ourselves. We've given as good as we got. People try to steamroll over you. But you know what I've done in this campaign is I've put things up on television that are Tom Coburn's own words. I've defended myself by doing that. You know, they put things up such as that I favored gay marriage and said I voted to ban it every single time just a couple of months ago. They put up on television that I favored partial birth abortion when I voted every time to ban partial birth abortion. And one of the things that's really outrageous about this campaign, one that's really precedent-setting, is the fact that a large portion of these attack ads are financed by two people right here in Oklahoma City. Aubrey McClendon and Tom Ward have put in well over $1.5 million to fund all these ads of me in a bobblehead, all these cartoons, all these jib-jab kind of things. All the ads about gay marriage and abortion are financed by two men. It's a corruption of the process, to say the least. Two people trying to basically buy a United States Senate seat. This has never happened before. I am proud of the fact that while I have defended myself aggressively, and the newspapers have talked about these charges against me as being blatant lies and untruths, that for the last week we've said no more to this. We have gone back and tell the voters what's really important. This race isn't about me or Tom. It's about them, the voters, their hopes, their aspirations, their needs, their desires. And for the last week, while I've been getting buffeted by all kinds of attacks, so we've been back to talking about the issues, not mentioning Tom Coburn at all, and just saying, here's what's important to people: jobs, health care, to stop illegal immigration, to get them cheaper prescription drugs, to improve their public schools. These are things that are important, and these are the things that we're trying to talk about.
Brad, both your comments and the clip we saw from Dr. Coburn mentioned abortion, pro-life, pro-choice. Just where do you stand on that issue, those issues generally?
Sure. Tom Coburn and I agree on many things about abortion. We both agree that we should ban partial birth abortion. We both agree that you should notify parents before a minor child even contemplates an abortion. We both agree that there should be no taxpayer funding for abortion. I think the big difference between us philosophically, morally, is that I believe that exceptions should be made for rape, incest, and life of the mother, while Tom supports a life of the mother exception only. All the papers, all of the interest groups have said that is my position. That's what I've always voted on. You know, I find it really offensive in the course of this campaign to see commercial after commercial saying things about abortion that are completely untrue, that the newspapers say are untrue, but it continues on television as part of these negative attack ads. You know, that is an attack on my faith, on my character, as a Baptist, as a Christian, as someone who voted completely the opposite to have this put up on television. And it's one of the sad aspects of American politics that people will manipulate such a sensitive issue for political gain.
Thank you. Let's take a look at a clip on the same subject from one of our prior shows by former Congressman Carson. I think it's well known you're a family physician, delivered almost 4,000 babies in the course of your career, and you are a pro-life advocate. There's been one quote that was widely circulated not too long ago that I have up on a graphic that I'd like to bring up, take a look at, and then ask you to comment and give any kind of explanation you'd like to. The graphic says, "I favor the death penalty for abortionists and other people who take life." Thanks for the graphic. That sounds rather harsh, and I know you've had other things to say about that.
Sure.
What can you tell our viewers?
The context of the question was, since you're so pro-life, how do you justify your position for the death penalty? And I made that statement, but I also qualified it. You know, when we take innocent life, and our intention is to do that, we consider the death penalty everywhere else in our state and in our country as that being a significant punishment for that act. The fact is I know what the law is today, but when we actually have, as a nation, sanctioned the taking of innocent life, now almost 40 million babies, and done that because we're rationalizing one moral error with another, I think it's wrong. And I yearn for a day when we get back into perspective the value of life. And remember, it's not just about unborn life. It's about life at the end of age now, too, because we're starting to struggle with that issue. And as we devalue life at the beginning, we're seeing that we can't help but now start to devalue it at the end. Well, our seniors are worth us protecting them, and we need to be about that. So I would hope for a day when anybody who takes innocent life intentionally, with the one exception of trying to save somebody's life, that we should have equal and fair justice applied to that.
And we're back live here, or at least on videotape, but not back on the verdict show where Tom Coburn made those comments. We will now take a break and be back. One more segment with Congressman Brad Carson, and we'll hear from Dr. Tom Coburn more on videotape when we return on The Verdict. Welcome back to this special edition of The Verdict. We're discussing the United States Senate race. Congressman Brad Carson with us in studio, and Dr. Tom Coburn available for us on videotape. Ken?
I want us to address now, Congressman, the question of what each of you think are the principal differences between yourself and the other candidate. Let's start with a clip from Dr. Coburn on that question. What are the principal differences between you and your opponent?
What's the big difference between the two candidates? How would you describe the difference?
Well, I think the first difference is the first votes we're going to cast when we're in the U.S. Senate. One's going to have Hillary Clinton and Ted Kennedy and Charles Schumer and Patrick Leahy controlling committees, and one's going to have conservative people who are going to put forth conservative thoughts.
Well, should Oklahoma voters take into consideration the national implications of your race?
This is going to be the race for control of the U.S. Senate in the United States. And so if they want a liberal United States Senate, led by Tom Daschle, and all the political philosophy that goes along with that, then they should vote for Brad Carson.
Okay. Well, that aside, the two candidates, you and Brad Carson, how do you differ?
The big difference. I believe in less government, less spending. I believe that we have to look long run. We can't use political gimmicks to enhance our own political careers. I believe we have to curtail spending. I believe we have to fix health care in this country. I think we have to pull in the excessive litigation that's associated with small business and health care. I believe we have to reform health care. I think we have to talk about it. I think we have to reform Social Security. I think we can keep our commitments to seniors and not hang our children. What's getting ready to happen in this country to our kids has never before happened before. We are undermining their standard of living, and every year we don't fix these problems means that we don't care about our children and grandchildren, and what we care about is ourselves. It's never before happened in this country. This country's been based on the ideas that we serve and we lead and we sacrifice for the future generations. It's not happening now. We need leadership to get it there. There are big differences on the social issues, from gay unions to life, to welfare reform, to issues associated with the scope and the field and the breadth of government, with tort reform. My goodness, I honestly believe, having been the brunt and seen excessive litigation, that if we don't do that, then we don't change the incentives in that, then we're going to be paying tons of money that's not going to be productive and not going to go around and solve the problems we want it to solve.
Brad, what's your response about the question about what are the principal differences between you and Tom Coburn?
I think they come down to two fundamental questions. And people who come from the 2nd District, which Tom and I serve, could comment on these and do often on the campaign trail. I think everyone should ask two things of their elected leaders, of their mayors, of their city councilors, of their state legislators, of their U.S. senator. That is, first, do they bring honor to you? Are you proud to have them represent you? And do they bring you honor? And do they make sure that they never embarrass you in any way? And the second is that they fight for you, and that they go to whatever office they may hold and use that position to benefit the people who sent them there in the first place. And I think on those issues, Tom and I are radically different. You know, I make the front page of the paper for fighting for seniors, cleaning up nursing homes, for lowering prescription drug costs, for trying to improve the quality of public education, for fighting for our veterans, for working with our farmers. Tom makes the front page for saying these kind of incendiary comments that travel all the way around the world to be reported. You know, whether it's the people in Oklahoma City are crapheads, or that farmers and ranchers make him sick, physically sick, or, you know, last week in a debate saying that African Americans are genetically inclined to die earlier. I mean, these are outrageous comments. It's a big difference. And the second is, will you fight for the people who represent you? In the 2nd District, I fought for better roads, for better health care, for jobs, to keep them going to Mexico, to build community health clinics. You know, the people of Northeast Oklahoma, where Tom and I both come from, would tell you that Tom never had any interest in those kinds of things. You know, he was off pursuing his own private mission in Congress, while the rest of us stayed behind and said we're languishing. And that's the big difference, is I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. in an independent, bipartisan way and fight for the people of Oklahoma, fight for farmers. Tom opposes the farm bill. I'm for it. I favor the road bill. Tom's against it. I want Medicare to cover prescription drug benefits. Tom opposes that. That's a huge difference between us. It's not about control of the Senate. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's about having a constructive leader in the state of Oklahoma who will fight for the people here.
Really, the final issue is pretty much open. Just some final comments, and we have some from Dr. Coburn that we'll show in a moment. But Congressman, you first.
Well, thanks. It's been a great campaign, and this state is so rich with opportunity, so diverse, and so extraordinarily blessed. And it's been a pleasure to campaign in every county. I've just come off my 77 in 7 county tour, hitting all 77 counties in 7 days on the eve of the election. And I am inspired by the people I meet. You know, I'm going to Washington, D.C. to try to help folks, to not play these kind of partisan games, to not put the interest of one political party above that of the country. It's to fight for this state, fight for this country, to build roads, to protect our jobs, to give health care to everyone. I promise the voters of the state that I will never embarrass them, that I will bring them honor. I am proud to be an Oklahoman, and they can count on me to fight for Oklahomans till the last dog dies. And that's why I'm running for the United States Senate.
We've had Dr. Coburn on a couple of previous shows, and the verdict gave him an opportunity in each of those shows. Here's some final comments that Dr. Coburn gave on the verdict. We'll give you a chance for some final comments. Anything you didn't get to mention?
Well, I just think this race is going to be a great contrast between the role of the federal government in terms of what it should and should not be doing, and how we change that. And if people like the way it's running today, if they think that we ought to be spending their kids' future, and if they don't want leadership to try to change that, they shouldn't vote for me. If in fact they think it's time for a new day, to where we really start thinking about the next 2 generations, we think about the real problems that are facing the country, and not the political squabbles that divide so much of Washington, then I'd love to have their vote, because my intention is not to be a U.S. Senator, but to change America and change it better for all Oklahomans and get us back to what the Constitution said the federal government was supposed to be about.
And we want to thank both candidates for making multiple visits to our set here on the verdict, and hope they'll choose to come back again and again. Congressman Carson, thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks,
We
Ken.
appreciate your
Always
time.
a pleasure.
We're going to look at the state questions when the verdict continues. We'll be right back. And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. I hope you enjoyed our discussion with the candidates for the United States Senate. Now we're going to turn our attention to the state questions that will be on tomorrow's ballot.
Oklahoma is a populist state. It has an awful lot of propositions on this year's ballot. We're going to take them from top to bottom all 9 of them and discuss them briefly with you about what these propositions call for, so that when you pick up your ballot and go to the voting booth, it'll be a little more familiar to you, and you can make the kind of decision you think is best for you.
Well, let's start with 705. Now, this has been labeled the Oklahoma Education Lottery. Basically, it creates the Oklahoma Lottery Commission, which would operate the lottery and create the rules. It discusses the distribution of lottery proceeds, which includes at least 45% would be awarded as prizes, and the net proceeds would be used for educational purposes, and it stipulates at least 35% of the sales after the first 2 years.
Let's move on to the next state question, which is 706. It's a companion issue to 705, and it is tied to 705. It amends the Oklahoma Constitution to create the Oklahoma Education Lottery Trust Fund. In other words, the lottery money taken in will go into a trust fund and will be used for education. There is a provision in this state question that does not allow this money to be used for other state purposes, and it cannot be used to replace other state funds. It will be controlled by the State Board of Equalization, and even if state question 706 passes, it will not be effective unless the companion question 705 also passes.
And state question 707.
707 is another taxation provision. It amends the Constitution to allow cities and towns and counties to use taxes and fees for 3 things: certain public investments. Cities and towns and counties can now use these taxes and fees for aiding in development financing for the particular jurisdiction. And it can be an income source for other public bodies. And it also allows the cities and towns to pledge these revenues over a series of years rather than just 1 year at a time.
Let's move straight ahead to the next issue, and that would be state question 708. It is the Rainy Day Fund constitutional amendment, and simply it lowers the amount which can be spent from the Rainy Day Fund. It lessens the amount that can be spent in the event of a revenue shortfall or an emergency.
And now let's take a look at state question 711. 711 has gotten a lot of publicity. It amends the Oklahoma Constitution to define marriage to be between one man and one woman. It prohibits giving the benefits of a marriage to people who are not married. It declares that same-sex marriages which are valid in other states are not valid in Oklahoma. And it makes it a misdemeanor for a public official to issue a marriage license in violation of this section. Let's continue on, if we may, to state question 712, another state question that has received a good bit of publicity and advertising in the campaign so far. State question 712 is called the State Tribal Gaming Act. Tribes will agree to a model compact that is set forth in the bill, and if they do agree to a model compact, they can use new types of gaming machines in their casinos that they have not been able to use otherwise, and can offer some card games. And if at least 4 tribes sign the model compact, then the 3 state licensed horse racing tracks can use the same gaming machines as the tribes are then authorized to use. The regulation of this gaming under Oklahoma law will be for the racetracks. The State Horse Racing Commission will do it. For the tribes, there'll be a tribal agency that can take care of it. And then the Office of State Finance will monitor, but not regulate, the tribal operation of its gaming operations. The proceeds will go to the racetracks, the horse owners, certain breeders associations, and then to the state for educational purposes, in part also to fund a program against, to prevent or correct compulsive gambling.
Let's move ahead to state question 713. This has been labeled the Tobacco Tax to Fund Health Initiative. It ends the existing sales tax on cigarettes and other tobacco products. It has a new tax of 4 cents per cigarette. It would be created, and also a new tax on other tobacco products. And the tax proceeds would go to the state, the city, and local government. It would go for health-related programs, including comprehensive cancer center and trauma care. It prohibits penalties for Indian tribes that violate tobacco compacts. And it provides some income tax relief and capital gains and retirement income.
Let's now look at the next state question 714. 714 amends the Oklahoma Constitution in relation to the calculation of the homestead exemption. It increases the income level at which senior citizens can qualify for an increased homestead exemption based upon the value of their property. The final state question that will be on the ballot is State Question 715. It amends the Oklahoma Constitution to create an ad valorem tax exemption to disabled military veterans who are 100% disabled as long as they incurred their disability through military service. If that happens, then they have an increased ad valorem tax exemption. Those are the 9 state questions.
And they'll be on every ballot throughout every precinct in the entire state.
In the same order in which we've presented them. We hope that this will be useful to you in trying to make an informed decision about how you ought to vote on these state questions, either yes or no. You'll probably all come up with your own ways to remember which ones are which, but whatever method you use, I think it is helpful to take in to the voting booth something that gives you some idea of which state question is which and what it's going to do, and we hope that what we've given you tonight will be of some use for you.
Kent and I'll have a final word about this show when we return. You're watching The Verdict.
Oh, well, the thing I was really hating was the idea that we might have to cancel this whole thing.
Yeah, and who knows?
Well, we still might.
Yeah.
I think when Brad understands.
Yeah, but he's going to have to cancel on somebody. I mean, they don't have an hour hole in his schedule.
Well, was left.
And welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Usually we're here Wednesday nights at 9:30, but I hope you enjoyed this special program on the United States Senate and also on the state questions that'll be on your ballot tomorrow.
Yeah, Mick, I think generally our viewers and the population in Oklahoma is getting, frankly, fairly tired of the campaign season and is really glad to see this finally coming to an end and an opportunity to go in and vote. It's almost like a jury sitting in a long trial for week after week after week, listening to the lawyers drone on and believing we can do that. And then finally getting their chance to go deliberate and vote. They are subjected to an awful lot of rhetoric, an awful lot of accusations, and now it's the time for them to sort it all out and do what they think is best for them and what they think is best for the state and best for the country. I think we have a few thanks to give. We want to certainly thank Brad Carson for appearing live here tonight, and being with us and sharing his views on some of the questions we talked about. We also want to thank Tom Coburn and his representatives for cooperating with us and letting us pull together these clips of previous Tom Coburn appearances on The Verdict in order to kind of frame the debate for us. Moreover, I want to make a couple of special thank yous to Brady Bruce, Brenda Bennett, and the other troops at KSBI for making this 1-hour time spot on a Monday night available to you and allowing us to bring you this additional information. We think we're an information show, and we hope we've carried out that mandate tonight. Thanks also to Legal Graphics for their yeoman work in giving us the graphics that you've seen so much of. And we hope that you'll take seriously your voting responsibility as we do, presenting this program to you every week. We wish you good luck on your voting decisions.
Polls open at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. They're open for 12 hours. Hope you'll take the opportunity to get out and vote at some point in that 12-hour period. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you back here Wednesday night at 9:30 tonight. So long from The Verdict.